welcome back to Green is Good, and we're so excited to have with us today Jeffrey Seder. He's the entrepreneur, or really the CEO, of EQB, and you can find EQB at www.eqb.com. Welcome to Green is Good, Jeffrey Seder.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Hey, Jeffrey, I was so excited to do this interview with you because I heard you before on the radio and in other interviews, and you are truly doing unique and amazing work in the field of horse racing and data analytics. And so before we get talking about your company and some of your massive recent successes with the Kentucky Derby and the Triple Crown winner, American Pharoah, I would like you to share the Jeffrey Seder story. How did you even get or come up with this business enterprise of consulting and helping the greatest stables in America choose the best horses?
Well, I took a ride one day in May at a rental stable in Southborough, Massachusetts, while I was in law school, and with a girlfriend, and I fell in love with horses, and I went crazy with it. And I ended up owning a horse and learning how to ride a racehorse and this and that and the other. And then I was getting a JD MBA degrees at Harvard, the law and business. And my thesis advisor was Archibald Cox. You may remember from the massacre and the Nixon Watergate stuff, if you're old enough. And I hadn't done my thesis by like March. I didn't even have a topic. So I had to sit in his office. And he said, well, what are you working on? And I had to admit nothing. And he said, well, what are you interested in? And I looked down and I said, horses. And I thought he was going to kill me. And instead, he reached his office was in the stacks, way down deep in the library, a little desk in the middle of it. A corner of a dark library stacks, and he reached around behind him and he took this huge book out from behind him and he plopped it on the desk, and the dust rose up, and he said, "This is the statute on governs horse racing in Massachusetts, and I don't think anyone at Harvard has ever looked at it. So why don't you look at it?" And I went crazy looking at it, and I studied it, and I went to the archives in Boston, in the Capitol there, and I went to the racetrack at Suffolk Downs, and I ended up getting an A on it. And I learned a lot. And I decided I really wanted to do something with horses. And I loved animals and outside and horses. I was too big to be a jockey, and I didn't know anybody in the sport. I didn't have any money, really, and I didn't have any connections. And so I couldn't own them or train them or do anything. I thought, well, I know stuff they don't know. I'm looking at what they're doing, and they've been doing it the same way for 300 years, and I can bring science and modern management. So I decided I would try to do that. And I graduated in 1976 when the East Germans broke onto the scene with all these medals and scared the shit out of everybody. And the United States and Russia used to compete for medals, and all of a sudden this little country was doing it, supposedly with mad scientists getting kindergartners and training them and finding them with all this science stuff. So the United States created a response, and I was a young lawyer. I was part of creating what became the United States Olympic Sports Medicine Committee. So I got to work with the guys in biomechanics and exercise physiology and all the sports science stuff. And then I broke away to do it for racehorses. And that's how it started, way back. I was doing Moneyball before Moneyball.
You were doing Moneyball before, and you were doing it for racehorses.
Yeah, for racehorses. It took a long time. We had professors from MIT and doctors from Harvard and veterinarians from the University of Pennsylvania Veterinary School and New Bolton Center, and we had statisticians, and we had biomechanists from the United States Olympic Committee, Sports Medicine Committee when it was just starting. I put together a hell of a team, and we did a lot of work. We spent a lot of time and a lot of money. And it finally came together after a long time. Meanwhile, I had another job. I was doing leverage buyouts, so I could afford to do the research. I had a day job.
So
otherwise I could never have done it. And what separates me from a lot of the other guys who are trying to do what I'm doing is it takes huge databases, and it took a lot of time and a lot of money. I published in the major refereed veterinary journals on when I do a study. I mean, some people do 10 horses on a treadmill and ponies on a lab and a treadmill. I was doing 10,000 major racehorses at major racetracks, following every split of the races over 10 years and publishing scientific papers about it and getting them in refereed journals, even though I didn't have a veterinary degree, because I had all these luminaries from different disciplines at major universities designing and carrying out the studies. We did some good work.
So really what sets you apart, and I want to talk about what you exactly do for our audience out there, but is you were doing a day job, but for years you amassed all this science and all this data that no one else can do overnight. If they want to go in and say, I want to be the next Jeffrey Cedar, you can't do it overnight. This is a lifetime of work you've put together to get you to this point that you are today.
Yes, it is. So I've had to have, there aren't that many American Pharaohs, and there aren't that many Kentucky Derby winners. So if you want to have a lot of them and know what they look like when they were babies, you have to pay your dues and put in the time. And you have to look at a lot of horses.
Right. Talk a little bit about what you do at UQB. Tell our listeners what you do, and then we'll get more into the American Pharaoh story, because there's a lot of questions I want to ask you about that.
It's not just knowing the difference between an ordinary horse and a great horse, because that's, a lot of good horsemen could do that, but it's knowing the difference between a good horse and a great horse that gets really tough. Well, my job is to bring to somebody, when we're looking to buy a horse, young horses, or breed them. Well, by the way, we're also, our major client we've been working with for 10 years has also become the leading breeder 2 years in a row in the United States, not just the leading racing stable, the Clips.
Wow.
That's Ram. But what we do is we have people who are really good at the traditional stuff, which is how the horse is put together, conformation and the pedigree, and all the traditional horsemanship, who've been trainers and jockeys and stuff. And on top of that, we overlay whatever is a practical, non-invasive use of modern science and medicine. So we use slow motion photography, and we digitize it and look at how they run and all the different parts of the stride. And we also look inside the horse at the size and the shape of the major organs that affect exercise physiology, the heart, the lungs, the spleen. We look at the size and shape of the windpipe, and we look at the functioning of their larynx and their epiglottis, because I don't want to get too technical in the radio, but a lot of horses, when they're under stress in a race, they're breathing. The larynx and the epiglottis start interfering with the airflow, and it stops them. That's why a lot of horses will go a short distance and then kind of just can't go any further. It's
from an entrapped epiglottis.
Yeah, things like that. Or other exercise intolerances in the airway stuff. And there's ways to look for that and to help predict it, and that's another thing we do on young horses. Then once somebody owns them, another thing we can do is we can look at horses that ran 4.5 furlongs early as a 2-year-old and run a race, which may or may not mean anything, and we can know who will be able to, as a 3-year-old, go 1.25 miles in the Kentucky Derby in a competitive time by extrapolating how their fractions and how they run, that logarithmic fatigue curve, or the pattern of their fatigue patterns. And it was developed for the United States Olympic committees to look at things like repetitive motion stuff like swimming, to see if younger kids who would run swimming 25 yards, extrapolating it out to what they might be capable of at 100 yards, for example. And it works. And we've been doing that we've developed huge databases, so we know the shape of the logarithmic curves and how it changes as they get older, so we can extrapolate what these young horses will do. So when a horse wins by 10 lengths in its first start in a very short race when it's very young, we know whether it's something that we want to try to buy or whether it's no big deal, and then when it gets a little older, it's not going to be. At longer distances, it's no big deal. And by the way, like 90% of them are no big deal. You don't want to buy them, even though they look great in that first race. But then there's the rare one that is. So we help on that, buying them off the track. We help buy them in auctions. Once they have the horse, we can continue to help, and what kind of race, what distance they're most appropriate for, and what surface. We can spot early lamenesses before it's really showing up any other way with the tools that we have. And then when they go to the breeding shed, we can help know who they should be breeding to, because we have massive databases of who's a match in terms of the heart and the lungs and the spleens and all the other major organs and the way they're put together. And it's been successful, I say, in helping one of our major clients over 10 years become the leading racing owner, winner of races, and their leading breeder in the United States 2 years in a row.
So talk about the success, and I don't know, and you're a very humble guy. I know you and I have shared emails and stuff, but I mean, talk a little bit. I want our listeners to hear, because we only have a limited time today. How successful are you? How many of the leading stables do you consult to, and how do they now really need to leverage your data? Otherwise, they will be behind the other stables. How big are you now, and how successful have you become?
Well, we're a boutique, but we do work for 6 of the top 10 stables in the United States. And our record at graded stakes races, I don't know how many people know it, but there's an international committee that grades stakes. So those are the top races. So there's, a zillion stakes races out there. They could be for $10,000 in Okefenokee Downs. The graded stakes are there's only 500 of them in the whole world. There's 100 of them in the entire world. Grade 1 stakes like a Kentucky Derby or a World Championship, and maybe a little over half of those in the United States. Less than 0.5% of the horses can win those kind of stakes. It's usually a once-in-a-lifetime thing. We've had 3 or 4 horses in the Kentucky Derby that we bought for clients every year the last 4 or 5 years, and we've had 37 Grade 1 wins. So that's like in the last 5 or 6 years. So I don't think there's anybody else who's come close to that track record. And we buy, by the way, for these clients, we're buying at the low average of the auctions where we go to. We're not buying the sale toppers that everybody else.
Right. You're watching their pocketbooks at the same time.
Well, yeah, it's not on purpose, but it just turns out that way. I see all the time $1 million horses that you couldn't give me. I found a hole in them, and I don't want them, and they don't run.
Wow.
They don't run.
Hey, for our listeners who just turned in, we've got Jeffrey Cedar on. He's the CEO. He's really the visionary and the genius behind EQB. To learn more about EQB, go to www.eqb.com. Now we're going to get to what our listeners really want to talk about. They want to learn about American Pharoah. Now, I heard you, Jeffrey, on before the Triple Crown ever took place, before any of the races, I heard you in an interview, and I want you to share part of this this is how fascinating and how visionary you really were. You on this interview, I heard before any of the races were run, said his lungs are bigger, his left ventricle is bigger, his heart's bigger, and you even talked about his knees and how they don't buckle back when he gallops, his front knees, which most horses, their knees buckle back. Can you share with our listeners all the data points that you knew? The only thing you said then, before any of the races were run, is like, we don't know how he's going to be in the head when he's roughed up a little bit, but physically, he's a super horse. Well, talk
we didn't
about...
know when he got to run against the really top in the world, and they look each other in the eye going up the stretch like firing line in that. The end of that Kentucky Derby. Some horses will just back off. And you don't really know till they're challenged whether they're going to.
But I want to talk about lungs, hearts, and knee buckling. Then I'm going to talk about the Derby specifically because I have some questions for you. But talk a little bit about testing. You had tested, like you said earlier, part of your EQB's business is the lung size, the heart size, the knee buckling. Talk a little bit about Pharoah and how he was truly a super horse based on your data.
I think that a regular horseman would have thought he was a really, beautiful specimen. He had all the traditional stuff. He looked apart. But when you when you watched him run, his stride was much longer and easier at the same velocity. It would fool you about how fast he was running. So you wouldn't really know unless you had a stopwatch, and then you'd think maybe you did it wrong. And I watch. I've just completed an auction here. I just watched 1,200 horses at racing speeds that are in an auction. And I do that all the time. I watch many thousands of horses, and I take them apart in slow motion, and I digitize them. And I'm looking for things that go wrong. Their ankles wobble and oscillate, so you don't know what angle their foot will be when they put it down. They bear about 8,000 pounds. They're 1,000 pounds going 40 miles an hour. There's at least 8,000 pounds on their leg when they do it right. When they put the foot down wrong, they usually chip this, or it hurts, or they get tired, or they sprain things. And they when they run, they put all their weight in their foreleg. The whole leg kind of buckles, and it bends the wrong way in most racehorses. They wing. They don't bring the legs back straight back and straight forward. They wing. It kind of loops around a lot of them. Or they go forward with their knee and then when the knee gets to the end of the knee, then the rest of the leg comes upward instead of sweeping it from the shoulder. So it's a low, clean action. They don't reach under themselves all the way with their rear feet like a greyhound, so that the rear feet are coming literally ahead of where their girth is before it touches the ground. And a horse like Pharoah, when he puts down his two hind legs before the front legs come down, the whole horse is going upward. Like a rocket. It's an angle. There's so much power there that he's able to push. This 1,000 pounds is not just pushed forward, but it's pushed upward, so the stride is longer. So he gets a foot or two more than the horse next to him with exactly the same effort every single stride when he tries. And it plus his his spleen is much bigger, and they were cheating in the Olympics. The Russians at one point, sprinters, by blood doping themselves. They would give themselves transfusions of red blood cells before the race, so they would have a higher blood volume and a higher red blood cells to carry the oxygen. But in a horse like that, the spleen contracts. It's a huge organ, and it can dump almost double the red blood cell volume. And this horse has a huge spleen, so he's just blood doping himself when he comes out of the starting gate, and that spleen contracts. And then he's got a heart that's more efficient. It's bigger. It's the muscle quality is different. The shape of it's different. The chambers are bigger. The thickness of the walls is bigger. I mean, usually we don't give details of anything about our clients or what we do for them, but I don't see how it can hurt for people to know that this horse, who's so special, is special in ways you can't even see special too.
Wow.
It shouldn't, and I think he can pass it on, because we see that when they're that's how we help make people in their breeding, and we help participate in helping Ramsey become the leading breeder of the United States, because we're picking out these very special physical specimens, and that's what you should want to breed to. A horse that has no holes in him, not one that won one race and had a break here or there, but one that not only was able to win, but had everything that offspring will have an extra chance of getting the advantages physically.
And just to be clear for our listeners to hear this part, Jeffrey, you were the ones who told the Zayats, you cannot sell this horse at the auction. You have to buy him back.
Well, they were our clients, and our job there was to find them yearlings, and tell them who they think they should buy.
Right.
And so our report to them was, this is what we're looking for. This is the one you own. And I know he was going through all kinds of things. They'd had a bankruptcy within a year or so of that. All kinds. There was some pressure to sell, but the good horseman would have told them that this was a great, beautiful yearling. But I think our opinion had a little more weight, because it was beyond that. It said, it's not just a really one of the best looking horses you could find. It's got everything else that's so rare, even in the good looking horses. So that was our report. Was we can't give you a list of who to buy, because we should take this one home. So we did. And, I can't say I was the only one who thought it looked like a nice horse, but I think I'm the only one who really knew that it was an American Pharaoh.
Amazing. Well, you said it before. I heard your interview before any of the races were run. So now I'm watching the Derby. I just listened to your interview a week before. And now I'm saying, let's see everything Jeff talked about: lungs, heart, spleen, the knee, his knee action, his back, feet, everything. Now I'm watching. And now he goes out there. And, I used to be in harness racing. So I'm very attuned to racing around the rail and saving ground. And I'm watching Pharaoh. He's 3 wide in the first turn. He's 4 wide in the last turn. How many extra feet did this horse have to run just to win the Derby? I'm like, if he survives this mess, I mean, he could. Jeff's right. I mean, he'll go on and just blow them down. I mean, 3 wide and 4 wide. How many extra feet for our listeners did he have to travel just to win the Derby than the horse that ran around the world?
I haven't calculated, but it didn't matter, because he was getting a foot or two every stride on him.
Right.
He's he just had so much more. And those were good horses. This was a tough year. This was one of the best crops in years. People say, well, who did he run against? He ran against some of the best horses in the world in one of the toughest years ever. But, I've also done the opposite. Before races, there was a horse, the most expensive horse ever sold at auction was called the Green Monkey. And right after the auction, and they printed this in the Thoroughbred Times in one of the major magazines, they came to me and said, well, what do you think of his stride? Because it was so beautiful. And I said, it's the wrong stride. It's the stride they use coming out of the starting gate. You only end up in that stride if you're green. You're not a good enough athlete to change your stride fully at full speed, and you end up caught in between them. It's called a cross gallop, and he did that the whole way. And it's more energy, and it looks terrific, but it's a disaster to try and do it in a race. And they printed that, and that $16 million horse turned out to be a complete bust. And so so I've done the opposite as well. When everybody was freaking out about the horse, I said, forget it.
So once he came out of the Derby sound, and he took them all on in the stretch after being around the 3 wide and 4 wide, takes on all the comers in the stretch, looks them in the eye, and keeps coming. Wins the Derby.
And he did it in the mud too. He did it in the mud. I thought the best race was the Derby though, because Firing Line, it was the first time American Pharaoh had to run hard. He had to try. And he'd given him a lead, and he came around there, and then he pulls up next to him, and he's running, and firing line did not give in, and he's a great horse, and and he was not going to, and he was going to have to really show something extraordinary, and he just kept going, and he finally got the idea, and away he went, and then after that, I think that was when he finally discovered what was really being asked for. And they didn't really have to hit him again. They had to hit him a lot to get him to wake up and say, "Now's time, guy, wake up." But in the Preakness and in the Belmont, they didn't have to hit him at all.
No,
he knew
so
what he was supposed to do. He knew that when the guy shows him the stick, that means now. And away he went. And it was fast. Every split after the first quarter, every quarter in sequence was faster than the one before. Every one. There was no fatigue curve. That in itself is a modern miracle. You never see that on the dirt race.
Well, explain what you mean, Jeffrey, because I know what you mean, but our listeners don't. Whereas your thesis and the science is every horse coming to the finish line, even if they're winning, they're slowing down. Explain what you mean, though, on every split was faster.
Well, in a dirt race, this doesn't always happen on the grass, but for a lot.
Yeah.
But in the dirt races. Yeah. When you see a horse passing another horse making a big move at the end of a race, he's usually still slowing down. He's just slowing down slower than all the other races.
Yeah.
And the entire race, they're generally slowing down, and it follows a predictable logarithmic velocity decay curve that you can calculate. And it's pretty characteristic for each horse, so that's how you can extrapolate and predict things. And so you can nail it for each horse unless they get hurt or they're sick or something. It stays that way. So what was extraordinary about this race was there was no fatigue curve. He just, after the first quarter, he started speeding up, and he kept speeding up from there on, and every quarter was faster than the last. And it's no wonder that, Frosted and that other horse, the other horse is trying to there's no wonder they couldn't keep up with him because he's a freak. Those are really good horses he was putting away in the Belmont Stakes. And by the way, his time was about 2 seconds slower than Secretariat's. But when Secretariat ran the Belmont Stakes, there were two things that were different, at least. I think there was 4 inches less cushion on the Belmont racetrack, so it was a deeper racetrack now, and plus the drug testing was a lot more primitive back then.
Wow.
So a lot of the horses back then had caffeine and God knows what else. But anyway, so I think this was really an extraordinary performance.
Well, and you had a lot to do with it. And that's
I had something to do with it.
Well, you were part of the team.
Yeah, I was part of the team. But Zayat's he's a colorful guy, but he's a very bright guy. He works very hard. There are a lot of the really good people, the Cathans and Ocala, who helped raise the horse and break the horse. Everybody who had anything to do with that horse was really good at what they did. I think that's also very important. And Zayat manages
including Bob Baffert. Right, including
Bob Baffert. Absolutely, Bob Baffert, including Bob Baffert. A lot of people think that good trainers are only good because they get all these good horses.
Nah.
Generally, they're good horsemen, and they're good managers. And in races, the horses are so fragile, their minds and their bodies, these things, they're like, real. They're like fine-tuned race cars. They are very fragile, and any little thing, 500 things can screw you up permanently. And the good trainers, they cover, they dot every I, they cross every T. They're not just great horsemen; they're great managers. So
hey, Jeff, we're down to the last minute and a half, and I want to leave you with the last words. So what's the future hold for EQB? And for our listeners out there, to find Jeff, it's EQB.com, because if you're interested in racehorses, he's the guy. What's the future? You're coming off this huge, massive success story, being part of a team, American Pharoah. What's the future for Jeff Seder and EQB and for your clients?
I just don't know. I mean, it's been a lifetime effort to get to here. I'm 66 years old. I may just start training other people to do this and write a book. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I know that we're going to stay boutique-y. We're not going to just, spray it all over the place. There aren't that many great horses, so you can't give them one to everybody. But we are looking for good people to work with. And there's more good horses out there than people know. We still go to auctions all the time and find a horse we love, and we can't find anybody who wants it because they don't like the pedigree. They don't like this. They just don't trust us. So there's still horses that can be found for somebody if they want them.
And you don't have to win the Kentucky Derby to have fun in the horse racing industry either, right?
No, I've made a life, and I've loved the sport.
Yeah. Well, Jeffrey Cedar, thank you so much for coming on and joining us today and sharing your story of EQB and your own personal story with our listeners. You're truly making the world a better place and are living proof that green is good.